Good morning, everyone. Let's get this party started. It's so good to see you all here this morning. Welcome to 1111 Downtown. I'm Tom McDermott. I want to welcome folks online who are watching. It looks like we probably have a pretty good number of us who are watching online today, or at least sometime this week, wherever you are. And our folks watch from all over the place, so we're glad to have you online as well. While I'm chattering here online, if you'll take a moment to hit that scan code there or the link and register your attendance. There's also an opportunity for offering there. And then here in the room, register your attendance as well. Let us know who you are and that you're here. Also, if you are visiting with us, go see Marty afterwards, and Marty will he wants to give you one of our 1111 tumblers. We appreciate you being here for our first-time visitors. I think maybe we have a few of those folks here, so good to have you. If your kids are with you today, or if you're a kid at heart, we have Play-Doh back here, right? So always I encourage people to grab up the Play-Doh, even if you're an adult. It discourages walking out during my sermon. So... Also, a couple of things to highlight that are coming up. I've mentioned in here a couple of times the Enneagram, and we've just kind of toyed around, talked about it. Some of you are familiar with that. It's a great sort of personality tool that's fun to kind of explore how you understand yourself. It's illuminating. It really is quite illuminating, and we're talking about wake-up calls today. And so in that sense, it also offers a lot of insight and kind of a waking up to who we are and what motivates us. It also helps us immensely, at least for me personally, it's immensely helpful in relating to others, understanding how others orient themselves, their motivations, their core, deeper motivations. There's an Enneagram workshop happening, and that's too bad I forgot to bring the flyers. It's not happening until the end of the month, but I'll bring flyers next week. It's happening on March 26th, and you can find out more information about it by going to the church website and clicking on there. It's going to be a lot of fun. I've done it many times, but I'll probably do it again just because it's so insightful. Also, our second Crafting Difficult Conversations begins this next Tuesday. So a number of you have said you are interested. If you'll email me, I will send you the link. We are going to be taking a look for 7 weeks. We'll start with 7 weeks and take a look at sort of how we form conversations around difficult topics. And myself will be there. Marianne Blue from San Antonio will be joining us. We may have Kagan Parker with us on that Saturday, on that Tuesday as well. That's this coming Tuesday, so more information on that. Also happening Tuesday night, our Wine and Wishful Thinking has begun to meet again in person at Winehouse. I can't think of anything better than having a glass of wine and a great discussion around what in the world was Tom talking about on Sunday, because the wine really does help. But I know not everyone partakes of alcoholic beverages, and as I've heard from my brother-in-law, water helps as well when you're trying to figure out what it is I'm talking about. So I invite you to be a part of that. Now, some of you may have noticed, if you walked in, we now have our bulletins online. This is the first effort at it, just creating a quick scan code. In the future, I'll have a better-looking scan code, and we'll have it plugged into a website. But for now, you can get the Google Doc. If you didn't, during the time that we're greeting one another, come up here, go over there, scan it with your phone, and you can pull up the bulletin. It has a lot of interesting things to reflect on, as well as keeping up with where we are in the service. It's so good to see you all this morning. We are talking about this morning the 7 deadly sins. And what's really interesting is I don't talk a lot about sin in here, which is a shame, because sin is really a good thing to talk about. In fact, what I'm going to suggest to you is because, as I was sharing with DeAndrea earlier, if I haven't completely confused you and messed up the way that you're thinking about things, I'm not doing my job and you're not listening. So I'm going to reframe sin entirely because we think about it all wrong, and that's because of 3rd century Christianity. That's a whole other story I'll get into, but I want us to sin better. So let's let the band begin as we think about that.
South, to the east, to the west, all up people never gonna stop. To the east, to the west, to the north and south, to the east, to the west, all up people never gonna stop. creation. One to the sun, one to the morning, one to the one. One to the air and the freshness we breathe in. One to the force of the change in the seasons. One to the mother from which all things come. One to the daughters and one to the sons. One to the father who helps us believe that nothing's ever gonna harm you, see. One to the soldier who walks in the streets, and one to the soldier who fights overseas, and one to the man who gets down on his knees and prays for God to send protection, please. To the east, to the west, to the north and south, to the east, to the west, our love people never gonna stop. To the east, to the west, to the north and south, to the east, to the west, our love people never gonna stop. One to the woman, one to the man, one to the culture from the time when it began, one to destruction, one to birth. One to the people who still fight for the earth. One to the people who suffer for the needs. And one to the people in the streets. And one to the healer who fights the disease. And one to the Lorax who speaks for the trees. There's no amount of money and no amount of man can bring back to life what's gone when it's done. And one to the people who rise with the sun. And one to the people who sleep when it's all done. To the east, to the west, to the north and south. To the east, to the west, one love people never gonna stop. To the east, to the west, to the north and south. To the east, to the west, one love people never gonna stop. Whole thing seems upside down. The whole wide world keeps turning around. Whole thing seems upside down. The whole wide world keeps turning around. Life is too short to make just one decision. Music too large for just one station. Love is too big for just one nation. And God is too big for just one religion. But to the practice of being in the flow, and what to the tears of the things we let go, and what to the moment we live in right now. One to the east, west, north, and south. To the east, to the west, to the north and south. To the east, to the west, one love people never gonna stop. To the east, to the west, to the north and south. To the east, to the west, one love people never gonna stop now. Both things seem upside down. The whole wide world keeps turning around. Whole thing seems upside down. The whole wide world keeps turning around. Whole thing seems upside down. The whole wide world keeps turning around. Whole thing seems upside down. The whole wide world keeps turning around. Whole thing seems upside down. The whole wide world keeps turning around. Whole thing seems upside down. The whole wide world keeps turning around.
Good morning, 1111. Whether you're here live or virtually, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you are right or wrong, sinner or saint, you are welcome here. So, second try. I light the candle of welcome, and with this holy light, we gather together in this time of worship. And I ask you to join me in our traditional welcome here at 1111 in the words of Rumi, which you see on the screen. Join me, please. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come yet again.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. You're so much fun. Would y'all stand and sing with us now, 1111? Come on. A classic from our hymnal right here. Love will find you. Sing with me, would you now? You may be watching from a safe distance. You may be so close you can taste the blood. You may have headed for higher ground. You may be drowning in the flood. Let's go! it's home. You may think there's only one way through. You may be waiting for the kingdom to come. You may believe it's in you. No matter what you do, God will find you. No matter what you do, God will find you. God will find you. God will find you. Yeah. Would y'all take a moment and offer one another a sign of peace, please?
Okay, so I'm inviting everybody to sit down. I'd like to share with you our story this morning, our gift of story, as we call our text reading for this morning. And if you did get the code, if you did get the bulletin on your phone, there's a little change up in the second verse, so I'll just let you know that in a minute. Otherwise, you can follow along here on the screen as well. I think it's printed out for the first one. Psalms 139, we're talking about the idea of the seven deadly sins. The number one seven deadly sin is pride, but I'm going to speak to the idea of the worthiness that's inherent in pride. And like I said, learning how to sin better. Okay, Psalm 139. You are the one who created my innermost parts. You knit me together while I was still in my mother's womb. I give thanks to you that I was marvelously set apart. Your works are wonderful. I know that very well. My bones weren't hidden from you when I was being put together in a secret place, when I was being woven together in the deep parts of the earth. And then I'm going to read these next two passages, another one from Proverbs, which is familiar to you all, and then one from the letter of Paul to the church at Philippi. So this verse from Proverbs 16, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. It is better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. very familiar proverb I think most of us have heard. And then this from Philippians 2. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to their own interest, but also to the interests of others. So,
I'm going to invite y'all to sing with us again. Elena's going to lead this one. Here we go. Verse 1.
There is a hurting in my family, and there is sorrow in my town. There is a panic all across the nation, and there is wailing the whole world round. But I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us, so lift me up in the light of change.
Another verse.
May the children see more clearly, and may the elders be more wise. May the winds of change caress us, even though it burns our eyes. For I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us, so lift me up to the light of change. So lift me up to the light of change.
such a beautiful song. And you know what? I was thinking about Holly Nair when she wrote that song, you know, talking about wailing around the world, talking about panic across the nation. And I think she probably wrote that song 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Here we are again, right? It's easy to be overwhelmed by everything that's happening, and there's a reason for that, because we're empathetic, we feel for the pain of the world. It's just no way around that. And yet, there's a way in which we need to learn how to be that is also helpful to that. And sometimes being overwhelmed by it is not really that helpful. Responding to it certainly is in whatever we can, but we also have to center ourselves. So we always take this time at Kairos to center ourselves, to practice that. And we do it in here because I invite you to do it elsewhere throughout the week, throughout the day, whether it's on the road and you're stopped at a stop sign and you just take a 5-second deep breath and just say to yourself, I'm taking all of this in and I'm letting all of this go. And so this morning, I want to invite us to do this practice for just about a minute, and I'm going to invite you with me. You can close your eyes. You can sit comfortably there in your chair with your seated upright, with your spine erect if you wish, or whatever's comfortable. You can close your eyes if you want or not, but just to begin to breathe as you hear the sound of the singing bowl. Try to let your focus be on that as you breathe in. And then as you breathe out, imagine yourself letting go of all those anxieties. It's a practice, and it takes a lot of practice, but breathe in, deep breath, and then you let it all go slowly. And as you take your last breath in and let it out slowly, I invite you to continue to breathe until you hear the very last of the singing bowl's vibration.
So I'll admit that this week I felt very overwhelmed. I didn't know quite what to do with everything that was happening. I ate inside of a restaurant, and I heard people sitting around me talking about how this could potentially be World War III. And I just shrunk. And then the hearing of the bombing of the nuclear plant, and I felt like I was shrinking even more. On Ash Wednesday, we come face to face with mortality, with life, with the beginning and the end. And so here we are in the here and now. I've been trying to practice this deep breathing. And on Thursday, I sadly had to say goodbye to one of my cats. And so that evening, I went and I sat outside, and I was breathing deep. And then the wind started blowing a little much, so I decided to sit in my garage. And I continued to breathe deep, and I was so focused that I heard sirens, but I didn't pay any attention because I actually was focused. Well, then I stepped out of my garage, and I saw that my neighbor's house was on fire. And I felt even smaller because we just stood there and we watched. And thankfully, they were okay. But so many friends are suffering. So many people in the world are preparing to say goodbye. There is so much war. And yet, as our song said, may we be open and be willing to allow the light to come. And may we truly be the change that, even though we seem so small, we are willing to work towards something greater. May we pray. Oh God, there are a lot of feelings that are not always helpful, but they are reality. And sometimes they are so overwhelming that we do not know what to do. And so when we sit and we are still, when we breathe in the air that is around us, that is a gift to us, and we exhale all of that which is so much. When we breathe in again, may we find strength, and then let go of the fear that keeps us from moving. May we breathe in the hope and the promise that we do matter and that we are enough, so that when we breathe out, we may know that we will be sustained as we work together for good. We say thank you for a place like this where we can come together to find community, to gain strength and companionship, to find others on the journey with us so that we need not walk alone, And on the journey, when we find others who feel lonely and overwhelmed, we might take their hand, offer a cup of cold water, and breathe together into whatever tomorrow may bring. We lift all of these things in the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
Two of us riding nowhere, spending someone's hard-earned pay. You and me Sunday driving, not arriving on our way back home. We're on our way home. We're on our way home. We're going home. Two of us sending postcards, writing letters on my wall. You and me burning matches, lifting latches on our way back home. We're on our way home. We're on our way home. We're going home.
And I have memories longer than the road that stretches out ahead.
Two of us wearing raincoats, standing solo in the sun. You and me chasing paper, getting nowhere on our way back home. We're on our way home. We're on our way home. We're going home.
And I have memories longer than the road that stretches out ahead.
Two of us wearing raincoats, standing solo in the sun. You and me chasing paper, getting nowhere on our way back home. We're on our way home. We're on our way home. We're going home. We're going home.
So a couple of things I want to say right off the bat first. That was a great job on that. And the band, a lot of the music that we play, of course, you know, as I've said before many, many times, it all speaks to what we're talking about in indirect ways, which is the fun that we try to remind ourselves to be a part of here in 1111, which is that everything, if we're paying attention, speaks to us of the ground of our being, of the love at the ground of our being, the possibility, the redemptive possibilities at the ground of our being. So we do things like Comfortably Numb, Crazy Train, Two of Us, Going Home. This idea of what sin is. We think of sin as something we do when sin is actually something we're not seeing. Okay? Sin is actually what we're not seeing. And all of us are really just trying to get home, ultimately. That's really what our lives are about. And sadly, we look around the world and we see everybody doing everything but empowering that path home. Hey, I want to do a couple of things too real quick. I want to say thanks to, I don't see Austin in here right now, but I want to say thanks. Oh, there's Austin right there in front of me. You blend into the backdrop there behind you. So I want to see Austin and Xavier and Jack and Ed. We want to thank them for all the work they do. You know, the technology The technology involved in this and going online and then now doing a hybrid where we're talking to people online, we're talking to you in here, it's a crazy reality, right? None of us were really trained for this in the church field, so to speak. And so we're juggling, and then we have a remote service here, and so we're constantly juggling, picking up, putting down, picking up. It's a chore, and these guys really do a great job. Ed also, I don't know if you've noticed the slides that all the words are on and all of that. Ed does such a great job with that, so thank you, Ed. It's so much fun. It's just so much fun. I hope you go back and you just watch the service because the slides are so much fun that actually everything is speaking to the message. So here we are in the season of Lent. And so Lent is a season of 40 days, right? It's 40 days excluding Sundays, but including Saturdays between Ash Wednesday, which I'm not sure how many of you are here. I don't remember seeing maybe a few of you here that were there, got the ashes. It was interesting because when we do it in the traditional church, from ashes you will go, to ashes you will return, from dust to dust, and to dust and dust you return, that kind of thing. I always wanted to go up to people, and I didn't do it this year because I wasn't in charge of the imposition of ashes, but I wanted to go up and go, you are stardust. You know, you are stardust. Don't forget the very source of your life and the very source you go back to, which is just a whole different way of orienting ourselves, I think, around this time, this traditional high season. It's also 40 days that we sort of reflect on who we are, what we're missing out on. So it is a chance to kind of go inward. We think of Jesus and the 40 days that he spent in the wilderness, temptation. We think of the Israelites, the 40 years they spent in exile. We think of even Buddha, who spent 47 days and nights out underneath the banyan tree, Prince Siddhartha, until he suddenly woke up. It says he became awake, and which means literally that's what Buddha means. And so we have this chance to kind of wake up. And so a lot of us think in terms of what we give up for Lent. So I thought about this. Go ahead and we'll see this first one. I don't always observe Lent, but when I do, I make sure it's to diet. Right? We know people like that. I'm sure that none of us are in here that do that. My favorite one here is the toddler. Gave up Dr. Pepper, made it for 2 hours. And then the next one, of course, gave up sweets, birthdays on Sunday. Oh, that one is maybe a little bit hidden. Here's my favorite one. Maybe you'll get this. I don't know if you can see the rats or the mice on this cat. Is Lent almost over? So we see this. Basically, what I want to suggest is that we are in this season because it's a season of waking up. It's a season of wake-up calls. And to be honest, I think I wrote in the blog post this week or the e-blast, I'm really having trouble with wake-up calls because, we've been in the midst of a wake-up call for over 2 years, right? And prior to that, if you listen to the song that we just sang, I Am Willing, 30 years ago, she wrote this song. It's always been an issue with us as human beings. We seem to be unable to get past our sense of who we are in relation to one another. And it causes us all sorts of grief and pain, to the extremes even. So Anthony DeMello, who's one of my favorite writers and spiritual teachers, he's a Jesuit priest. He wrote this, and I think it speaks to where we are in this season. I hope you can follow with this and stay with this throughout the season. Spirituality means waking up. Most people, even though they don't know it, are asleep. They're born asleep, they live asleep, they marry asleep, they breed children in their sleep, they die in their sleep without ever waking up. They never understand the loveliness and the beauty of this thing we call human existence. Spirituality means waking up. Now, when Linda first started this service, which was over in Wesley Hall, and it was in the round, and it met in the evening, on Sunday evenings, it was called Roundtable Worship. So we met in the round, and we probably will get back in the round once we end up with some extra cameras here, and we can kind of be in the round and figure out how we do that in this space again. But we met in the round, and then when Charles Gaby took this service over about 15 years ago or so, and I took over the music with the band, and we sat down and we were thinking about a good title for it because we're going to move to the morning. On Sunday, we wanted a different name. A lot of you know this story. So we were trying to think of a different time to meet, not just 11 o'clock, but something odd, not 11:10, because 11:10, 11:15 is kind of typical. So we said 11:11. Rolls off the tongue, has that kind of parallel structure, looks really interesting. And then for the next several months and weeks, and even to this day occasionally, we get calls or emails. Do you know what that means? And we're like, no. That's what they would say. Or they'd say, do you know how special that number is? And we go like, well, no, really? And then, of course, we saw this. 11:11 is a wake-up call. inviting you to tune into the realms of spirit and experience beyond the veil of illusion. Pretty much says it all, right? Like I said, if I haven't troubled you and if I haven't confused you and you've left thinking about something because it certainly isn't the way you always heard it before, then I'm not doing my business, my job, or you're just not listening. We just thought it was an interesting time to start, but we realized that we really are in this place of thinking about our faith and our spirituality in deeper ways that perhaps might wake us up to the illusions we're living in. And you would have thought that the pandemic would do it. You would have thought that perhaps the racism and the reckoning and the awareness and the waking up to sexism and gender issues and inequalities and Black Lives Matter and the death of innocent individuals. You would have thought all of that would wake us up. And now Ukraine being attacked by Russia and the fear and the anxiety that DeAndrea voiced so well for all of us. You would think that maybe we'd wake up, but I don't think we're waking up. I think what we're doing is what we always do, right? We're like a dog with a bone. We run to the center where the bone is. You might call it Jesus or God or Buddha or energy or whatever it is. And then we drag it back to our corner because that's where we feel safe. But what really the kingdom calls us to be about is to get out there in the middle of things and to represent, if you will, represent the ground of being. Lou Adams, who was the director of the Pastoral Care Center over at Bright Divinity School, when Linda and I were studying there and I was doing an internship in pastoral counseling back in the day, he would always take us aside after watching us, after supervising our counseling with a client. And he would say, you realize what's going on? And we were trying to describe everything. And we were going through this intricate sort of detail about what it was they were suffering from and how we were trying to approach it. And then he said, no, it's just a power struggle. He said, all relationship is power. It's all a power struggle. And for the longest time, that so offended us because we were like, no, it's this darker sort of subconscious stuff going on. It's these other issues that are going on, these repressed kinds of things. And he said, but the bottom line is it's all power because people are missing something, even if they don't know what they're missing, and they're trying to get it. And oftentimes, everything is transactional. Everything becomes transactional rather than relational. Our looks, right? We struggle with our looks. It's a power struggle with ourselves in the mirror, but it's also a power struggle with everybody else that we see because we're already comparing ourselves. We're already looking and wondering what they're thinking. We're already in this relational sense of power. Who's got the self-esteem, and how do I get it for myself? We do it at our jobs. We do it online. We do it at work or home or even at the grocery store. It feels like life is a struggle between navigation and negotiation. And I think what it really reveals to me is that sin is really best understood then as disconnection as opposed to connection. Racism, sexism, globalism, all of our understanding of life revolves around this idea of disconnection rather than connection. So what I want us to think about then is I want to think about what we overlook with this narrative that we live by and just how interconnected we are and what are the consequences of this deeper sort of this deeper sleep that we're in, and yet that is really a dire reality for all of us. So let's talk about sin, because we love sin, right? If I'd put that on there, I thought about doing that, putting that just as a heading, sin. Come join us on Sunday. And I thought, well, maybe somebody would come just out of curiosity or mockery or something like that, but I figure most of you would be, stay home for this one. The earliest followers of Jesus fell into small communities of sharing, collaborative inclusion. After Jesus died, they went into different communities, all of them scattering. And by 70 AD, the fall of the temple, they went scattering across the whole Middle East region. And they were in different communities with different understandings about what they'd just experienced. And within the first generation, everything had already started to change except for one thing. They were centered around community. They were centered around trying to figure out what that meant to be in community. They were even diverse in their own makeup. Jews, Gentiles, slaves, women, men. The whole role structure was redefined. And then by the mid-3rd, 4th century, the Roman Empire made Christianity a state religion. And for nearly 1,700 years, much of the church has held Christianity captive under the influence of power rather than the inclusive and worshiping our interconnectedness with all of life. So that even today, you can see it, right? Our churches are still split over how we are to orient ourselves to the sacred. And even more so, what's right and what's wrong. And why? Because we're still running out to the center, grabbing the bone and running back to our own corners, rather than sitting out there and sharing that bone with everybody else and figuring out how the messiness works. You understand what I'm saying? So even now the church is figuring out who belongs in the church, LGBTQ, who belongs in the church, who doesn't belong in the church. Thankfully, our community and our church understand inclusiveness and affirm that. But it's not perfect. We still struggle with what we understand. And even this idea of environmental disaster, environmental crisis in the latest UN report, and we can't decide on whether or not it's true or not, right? Because wake-up calls sometimes have to hit us in the face. I mean, they have to knock us on the ground. And as many of you know, and you've looked back at your own lives, at your own wake-up calls that you've had, it probably wasn't the first one that finally got to you, right? They've been coming for years. And somehow cognitive dissonance, somehow denial, somehow distraction, we're able to live with a lot of power struggle before we find to come to sense about the illusions we live in. So the church could see this early on, and the church began to devise what's right belief and wrong belief, and they came up with these 7 deadly sins. They were first actually created by this guy named Pope Gregory the Great in the 6th century. Prior to that, these sins didn't really exist, which is interesting. And then the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas kind of solidified them more clearly, and then made all sorts of other counter kinds of things, like the 7 heavenly virtues, the 5 sacred powers. And they sort of created this thing that the more you looked at it, the more it was like a Rube Goldberg machine, right? Because how are you supposed to deal with this sin? Well, you have to go that way and then come back this way, and then you have to go that way, pick up an indulgence over here and a confession over there. Or if you're in the Protestant church, you just need to believe right. And that'll take care of some of that. You see how that works? It's still power. It's still about this transactional relationship. So we have these 7: greed, lust, envy, gluttony, anger, and sloth. And then their corresponding virtues were humility, charity, chastity, gratitude, temperance, patience, and diligence. I only mention that here because that's the typical ones, and I'm throwing those out the window. I will look at the typical deadly sins because it gives us a framework for how to understand them in a different way. Isn't it interesting that killing's not up here? Isn't it interesting that hatred is not up here? So good news is coming. Oops, about burden of sin. Oh, I like that. I just wanted to show that one. That's what we think of as sin, right? We think of sin as this burden. I love how it's always presented, too. It's either weighting down, it's red, it's clouded in fire, or shadowed in darkness. I love that because it's bad. It's bad. So it's good to know what's bad, right? We don't have to deal with it. We can avoid it. So good news is coming. So here's what I want to think about. What's good in all of this? I want you to think with me that this idea that I heard in seminary once triggered this whole path that I got on, which was to try to reframe everything, to try to understand things less dualistically, less out there and in here and other than and us versus them and all of that, and to think more non-dually, which is somehow we're all caught up in this mess together and we're all interconnected with the world around us, the very life we live in, the very cosmos and stars we come from. And so the saying that I heard was that the best things in life are the easiest to corrupt. I've already told you why that is. The best things in life are the easiest to corrupt because we're like dogs with a bone. We go out the center, we grab our bone, we run back to our corner. I'm going to stay with that image. Mike, you like that image, right? Our resident vet here, he likes that. He knows what I'm talking about, yeah. Grab the bone, run back to the corner, right, where it's safe and we can live. Now, there's other animals in the corner that we like, right? There's other animals with us there, so we'll share our bone, but we just go out there and grab and come back. So what I want to say is best things in life are the easiest corrupt. So the alternative to that I think we can wake up to is in this idea of understanding what sin is that what if, in fact, the best things in life are the easiest to corrupt, then maybe embedded in the worst things that we think is actually a hint of the best things. If in fact what we're simply doing is corrupting them because we're not paying attention and we're living under this illusion, then perhaps what we're missing is that the best things are actually embedded in that anxiety. that the best possible things are actually embedded in what we think are the worst things. It's a little confusing, I think, maybe, but we'll stay with it. We're going to keep with it, and I'll keep bringing it up each week. So the next one, please. So we're going to talk about the deadly sins in a new way. Isn't that pretty? Doesn't that just change how you think about it? Sin, it's nice and green. Grows, it's cool. Wake-up calls are interesting. You can take up your own life where you experience them, and if you look back, as I said, you find out sometimes that you had these wake-up calls all along. And the problem is, the way Einstein put it, is that we can't solve a problem with the same kind of thinking that gets us there in the first place. So we have to do something different. We have to look for the good stuff that's embedded in what we think is the bad stuff. We have to look there because it's the only place we keep not looking. It's the only place we keep avoiding because we've been told to. Because we've been structured around this relationship of power and transaction. As Isaac Asimov put it this way, let's see, is he next? Yeah. Universe is not quite as you thought it was, so you'd better rearrange your beliefs because you certainly can't rearrange the universe. So what if sin is less? Now hold on to this because it's not a quote, but it's going to come up time and time again throughout the series. What if sin is less about what we do that is wrong? Okay, what if sin is less about what we do wrong and it's more about what we fail to do right? What if sin is less about what we do wrong, but more about what we fail to do that is right? We need a better understanding of this idea of sin and sinful acts and what they speak to us today. So Linda and I, when we were in seminary, we attended our first, we attended our first feminism class in seminary. I had attended feminism studies when I was at UT in Austin, because I was a social worker, and they had these courses there, and so I was very much embedded in that and immersed in that. One of my least favorite authors was Mary Daly, Gynecology. What was the other one? Beyond God the Father. Some of you read Mary Daly. Some of you should try to read Mary. That should be one of our dangerous books that we ought to read. You will never hate yourself as much if you're a man after reading Mary Daly. Or, as my case would be, you will never hate Mary Daly as much until after you read her book. It was so hard to read that stuff. And as we sat in the feminist class, what was interesting, our professor immediately structured us where the women were in the inner circle, the men were on the outer circle, and we were not allowed to speak. Interesting. It was a fascinating experience. So I haven't thought of Mary Daly for a long time because I'm still dealing with the trauma of that reality, which I believe is true. I believe much of what she said was very much true. But the reality still is it's hard to face your conditioning, right? It's hard to deal with your conditioning as we look at Black Lives Matter, as we look at even #MeToo, as we look at all this reality as we look at the empire orientation of church even. It's hard to face that with an open, awakened mind because we live with an illusion of conditioning. So, Mary Daly wrote this quote that I stumbled on this week. The word sin is derived from the Indo-European root, she's after my own idea, I love to study this, is derived from the Indo-European root ESS, which means to be. What? Sin is derived from the root word which means to be, not anything else, just to be. When I discovered this etymology, she said, I intuitively understood that for a person trapped in patriarchy, which is the religion of the entire planet, to be in the fullest sense is to sin. All right, let's take a look at this and unpack this just for a couple of quick minutes. All right, so next one, keep going, next one. Oh, I love this right here. Better be a lion for a day than a sheep for all your life. Be a powerful lamb. Be a curious sheep, right? Okay, anyway, we'll go on to something else. All right, next one here. So I want to go over these really quickly, and then we'll wrap up with the music here. So first, if you look at sin, it's root word S, to be. I love the idea I put Shakespeare up there too, or not to be. Because I think what we do is we think about avoiding things is not being something, but what we're actually doing is we are simply disconnecting from what's possible in the mess in the middle, right there where the bones are. We just are afraid to stay out there, and so we miss being, right? So sin is this idea of to be. Somebody has said, I think in the Protestant church, we talked about sin as missing the mark. I love that idea, missing the mark, but here's the thing. It seems like when people are talking about that, you intuitively know what they're talking because you've heard what missing the mark means. But nobody's ever said that. It wasn't written anywhere. It's part of the institutional language of what missing the mark actually means. What does missing the mark really mean? It's a good question. Hang on to it. Now we look at pride. Pride you think of as standing up tall, standing erect, which has a very masculine imagery to it if you think about it. If you think, okay, anyway, I thought that would get a laugh. I don't know. I thought that would get a laugh. Pride comes from the words per and esse, which means literally to move forward or to stand in front of. It doesn't mean to be better than or to feel really good about yourself. It means to move forward as if to invite. What? Pride means to invite. It means to move forward. So then I came up with this idea of worship. What is worship? What are we about in here? Why are we here? And if you look at worship, again, we think of this dualistic idea traditionally that we are doing something for something out there and invoking it in here. But in fact, worship is rooted in the words worth, which means value or to have life, to give life to it, or ship, which means to shape, to form, to give shape to. So if you really think about it, worship is practicing the art of giving shape to the worth of one another. Boom. That's a really hard thing, I think, for us to get our heads around. When I was at TC Murph, Tarrant County Medical Educational Foundation, a methadone clinic for my first job as a social worker, I worked there for 2 years with narcotic addicts. 100 narcotic addicts I had on a regular rotation in my caseload. I was 22 years old. Most of them were in their 40s and 50s, some 30s. Intimidating, overwhelmed. I've talked about her before, Miss Legato, who was the nurse there and had been there for the 18 years of the organization. She was a wonderful little short Italian woman. Just had a bite like a bulldog, like a bulldog, but she had a heart that was just warm and embracing. And so she could really be firm, but she really loved deeply. And so one of the things that I asked her about is that early on, when I was asking her about how I should relate to these people, she said that the thing that we have to learn is that there is a deep belief that something is missing. Every one of these folks have lost their sense of worth, that they even have anything left to give to life. Instead, she said what they really are wearing is like, that's where I got the idea of the t-shirt that says, love me. Right? The idea, she would say that. If you see them as coming into the room and they've got the shirt on that says, love me, it sort of really shows what's going on outside this hard veneer, outside this manipulative sort of structure that they've got themselves in, this transactional way of relating to you so that they can get more methadone or so that they can stay on the program. She said it's created a massive black hole in their lives. It's like a bottomless pit for hunger. And the thing is that they've lost their sense of connection, their sense of self-acceptance. Once when I was 22, it was like my last of the second year, so toward the middle, I was so overwhelmed with being intimidated, I could never really get a handle on how to deal with folks because these are hardcore individuals, hardened, they've lived their life in manipulating and trying to get past the legal system. So when they would come into me, I was intimidated by this just out of college. Miss Legato took me aside and she sat me down and she said, what do you see when you see your client? And she had to ask me that several times before I finally got to the answer that I knew she was looking for and that I was refusing to see. I said, I see them as a power struggle. I see them as intimidating and manipulative and trying to beat me, trying to get the better of me. She says, you know what I see? And I said, what? I see my children. She said, I see my sons, my daughters, my family. Every one of them lost. They're just trying to find their way back home. She says, if you can begin to see them in that way, then you begin to invite them into something that they have forgotten how to see and that most of us don't see. So that when we think about Colin Kaepernick, who took a knee back in 2016 and continued to do so over the years that he continued in football, that what he was doing was not the proud, defiant act of somebody who wasn't patriotic. I'm going to argue that. I don't know that any of you would argue with me on that point. Patriotism, like so many things, becomes like that bone in the middle of the room, in the middle of the grass, right? And we just take it back. It's like a golden calf, my bone and my friend's bone. Not sure as you don't understand. You're acting wrong. When he took a knee, what he was doing was he was literally standing in front of all of us and inviting us to see the worth of one another. Do you see that? He literally was not inviting us to see the worth of black people, or certainly standing up in honor of those who had been killed and continued to be oppressed by police in different parts of the country, but he was also standing up for something maybe he wasn't even aware of. But that was this pride that says it mirrors our worth for one another. Worthiness is that shared equality, that pride that invites us to see. It's at the heart of every one of these deadly sins. And worship in here is this opportunity to practice remembering how we're supposed to be doing that. So as we explore the other 6 deadly sins in the coming weeks, and we explore their inherent opposed or oppressed virtue, I'm going to invite you again to remember this idea. Sin is not so much about what we do wrong, it's much more about what we fail to do right. So that when the early church defined human life and its struggles in terms of these 7 deadly sins and what's right behavior and what's wrong behavior and the consequences for them, we're still living in that shadow today. It's a zero-sum perspective and a non-zero-sum reality. The sooner we realize we live in a non-zero-sum reality, the more this world has a chance of surviving us. We have a chance of surviving as well. So this last one to come up here, life pretty much comes down to 3 things. Everything changes, everything is connected, so we pay attention. I actually wanted the other image to come up that I forgot to mention, which was something wonderful is about to happen, that billboard that I saw on the highway once, traveling with my son out east. I want to suggest to you this last thought, that when we're caught up in stories and these actions of power and greed that we see going on, maniacal, power-hungry people across the world, greedy, capitalist-hungry people in our own backyards, pointing fingers at one another, judging one another. When we see this kind of reality of this divisiveness, the better story to tell is the one where pride means we stand in front of others, not because we're proud, but because we recognize others' worths. And when we stand, we are inviting them to see that worth in a mirror. That's what it means to be proud. In a sense, as I said, sin better. Amen.
Before we start this last song, I just want to say, since our bassist, Mike Brown, passed away in December, it's been a very difficult process to find a new permanent bass player, so we were having subs come in that whole time. Well, I'm proud to announce that we have found a permanent new bass player. He's a beautiful soul. He's very musical. And he's a quirky bird. We've all fallen in love with him, and I hope you will too. That is Lee Allen, everybody, right there. Thank you for coming in, sir.
Maybe you can have all the things that you ever dreamed of. Maybe you can drive your Hummer down your gold-plated streets with your dove. Oh, of all the things you want to buy, how do they make you feel inside? You won't find your light in the bargain bin, so you better start your path with them. Hey. never seen a skyscraper or a superstar. Going up and down in an elevator, never knowing where you are.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we have this next 6 weeks that we're going to be spending in Lent. I hope this is an opportunity to revolutionize our souls a little bit and get a little new perspective on things. I wanted to make sure that we thanked our anonymous donor. We're not going to mention they requested to be anonymous, but the coffee comes from Vaquero Coffee, and I think the coffee will be here today, maybe next Sunday too, and then after that we've got some others. But let's give an applause and appreciation for the coffee. It was great if you didn't get it. If you want, get some on your way out. Also, then next week, we're going to be talking about greed, but not like you think, obviously. and coming after that, then for the next 3 or 4 weeks after that, Kagan Parker. Some of you remember Kagan Parker. You sing with the band. She's been up in Maryland studying critical race theory, getting her degree focus in that. A really brilliant, sharp young woman. And she and I are going to be in dialogue for the next few weeks after that. So we're going to look at sin from the perspective of critical race theory. Does that upset anybody? I hope it does. If it doesn't, you're not thinking hard enough. And it's really not about race, is it? It's really about understanding our connection and relationship with the world around us. And how are we waking up to this reality in a way that actually helps not to transaction with it, but to transform it within ourselves, from within ourselves. So let's stand for our benediction. Look forward to seeing you next week. Receive our benediction. We go in pieces. Our lives have been upended, ideas have been upended, but new ideas are even now being mended. And though we travel and unravel, we travel together. In order to diffuse these illusions, to sort of invite the confusion, to experience together the intrusion, that we might discover life's richness, the very God and ground of our being, all anew with one another. So we go in pieces. Amen.